I just decided, you know what, I'm going to find an easy way to do it in terms of half units, because that's the only thing I can think, that's the only way I can think. I don't, so those other subdivisions are not so good. So if you see, what I have here is I've got the sketchbook paper divided up into 3 units, and depending on how I feel about it at the time, sometimes the heels fall on the bottom line, sometimes the ankles fall on the bottom line. I think for beginning students, what you're going to see is it's better to have the ankles fall on that line and then the feet go below it, because people always make the legs too short when they're beginning. They always make the legs way too short, and then you have these people who look kind of dwarfish and like their upper body's kind of weird. So the first thing that I wanted to show you, actually I'll show you how, I think I have a photo of how I was looking at it in my studio. Yeah, okay. So basically this is my studio, and this is the drawing board, and I'm looking to the left, and I've got a piece of paper behind it, and I have this skeleton, and you can afford these skeletons for yourselves. A lot of medical supply companies for medical students, you can go and buy a quarter-size skeleton like this. I think it's like 50 to 100 bucks, and they're really good to have. The only problem with them is that the skulls look really funky. Like the proportions of the skulls are wrong, but they also sell skulls that are anatomically better. So the other thing that I wanted to show you is I'm working with 6B pencil. And the 6B pencil, it's kind of a nice medium between the 8B and the other ones. And I wanted to show you also how I hold it, because that was one of the things that, I'm seeing some of you guys choking up on it like it's a baseball bat and holding it like you're taking notes for a biology class or a history class. And I think to hold the pencil like this, it's a lot better, it's looser, it's a little easier to maneuver, rather than like that. Like this, not like that. This, not that. Okay. So the first way that I start is I start with marking 3 measurements. And one of the things you might even want to consider is grabbing a yardstick when you're doing the skeleton and just having the yardstick on top of the paper to do it. And if you're working with a smaller pad, just use a ruler and do it, because you can find the mid-mark really easy that way. So the next thing that I did was I divided it up into more subunits that are the measurements that we'll need. And so this half unit right here that I'm pointing at is actually where the pelvis comes together. This is called the pubic synthesis or synthesis pubis or something like that. It's just basically where the 2 bones come together, and that's the center of the body. It's also where the genitals are on a guy, so you'll know where to kick. So you can aim right for that spot halfway. Now, the next thing I did was I divided the top part of the body, which is this part here, into another series of quarter units or half units. So this is half of the top half, and then again a quarter and a quarter. And so that means that the head in my measurement system, and I know that if you study with other people, they're going to say, that guy's crazy, that's wrong. But you can decide if you want to, and you can study with other people and get another system. But basically, it's so easy this way. So this is the half, this is the head, and that's the distance of the head, which is a quarter, which is actually, if you think about it, it's kind of 1/8 of the entire figure in some ways, if the top part of the body is. So some people are going to think that that's just not a good proportion, but it seems to work for me. This quarter unit is you almost discard it once I've put it down. It's just a way of getting the head size in there. And if you take a look at it, the neck is about half the height of the head. So you'll know that the neck ends right there, okay? And the other thing is that the bottom of the rib cage is also about a half a head from the bottom of the pelvis. So I'm going to show you what all that means in a minute. So if you can put those measurements down there. And then the last measurement that I wanted to show you is the quarter mark here, which is the knees. Now I put them on a box here so that one foot was pointed sideways and one foot is pointed forward, so that you can kind of get a sense of the geometric shapes of the feet as well. Okay? This is the armature that I use to draw the figure, and these are the geometric shapes that I make them all fall into. So now that you probably have your drawing done and you have those marks there, it's all a bunch of trapezoids. Do you see that? And so the head is an oval, and you've learned how to draw the head with me already, and we can go back into those proportions later, and I have them sort of marked out here. But if the top of the rib cage is about a half of a head down, it starts there, and then if this is the top of the pelvis, notice that the pelvis doesn't rest on that halfway mark. It goes a little bit further down. You see that? So in essence, the pelvis is almost the length of a head. That's how I think of it. It's almost the height of a head is the pelvis. So if you just start it a little bit further down, right, and then you give yourself about a head here, which means that it falls a little bit, it's about, I don't even know what the fraction is on that. Does anybody know? What is that, like 1/16 of that? And you give yourself about a neck's length between the top of the pelvis and the bottom of the rib cage. Now the other thing is, check out how the legs come out of the sides of the pelvis. They're actually kind of like this weird zigzag or a spoke. And one of the really great anatomists, this guy named Robert Beverly Hale, who used to teach at the Art Students League, when he talked about how to draw the human figure, he always said that there's always a counterbalancing reaction to every motion or every movement of a bone in a body. It's zigzagging. So for every zig, there's a zag in the body. So if you check out even the bones here, it zigs this way, then it zags that way, then it zigs this way. So you see, like, there's never a straight line. If you look at someone's arm as they're hanging down, the hand will go one direction, then the forearm will go one direction, then the upper arm will go another direction. Every time you draw a connection to a bone, it has to zag or zig. It's just a way of thinking about it. So I start with a series of trapezoids, and then I draw the collarbone that comes off of it. And then this bone here, the bone of the upper arm, really falls, this skeleton's a little inaccurate, but if you check it out, the bottom rib is just about where the elbow is. Now check that on your own body. Like if you were to put your elbow against your side, you can see that your elbow really falls right around where that last rib is on your side. You get that? And then if you were standing, because you're seated now, you won't feel it, but your wrists are right at that bone on your hip. See how the wrists are right there? So that means that you can use the rib cage here, and you can use this bone to delineate the length of the forearm and the length of the upper arm. And you have these collarbones that sort of wing out like this. So your arm actually tucks in underneath the collarbone, and the shape of this, see how it looks kind of like an egg? It's actually, I always think of it as an upside down trash can, those trash cans you have in the bathroom. That's what it looks like to me, okay? And the hands are ovals, kind of like the head is. Think of it almost like a ping pong paddle is the hand. So that gives you the basic proportions. And the knees fall on that quarter mark. And then if this is the ankle, right, that last mark, it's a series of diamonds or ovals down at the bottom with a division in half. And the reason why I put the division in there is it makes it a little easier to figure out where the toes start and end. So then I put in the spinal column, okay? So it gives you a sense of how the figure should be put together and where the spinal column runs in. And now what I want to show you is how to think of what's called the mass conceptions of those bones, of the bony masses that we're looking at. So the first thing is, I know this sort of looks like a lampshade, but think of it as a lampshade that's been sort of squashed a little bit. Or like one of those trash cans in the bathroom that are kind of like, they're sort of oval on top and oval at the bottom. That's how I think of this rib cage here. The pelvis is really almost two plates with a spoke between it, but the plates sort of spin out or open up. And one of the interesting things about the human body is that this hole here on the skeleton opens up and sort of dislocates when women are giving birth. So what you're going to find is with women that this part here is actually a little bit wider than on men. And that's why women have a shape that sort of flares out at the hips slightly. Okay, but men tend to have a more boxy pelvis. And that's why women's genes are different than men's genes for that kind of construction, because they compensate for it widens out slightly. It's a stereotype. All of these things are stereotypes, okay? So you have two discs, a trash can, and then, of course, the oval, that's the head. So you can see through it, and the neck kind of goes through this hole on the top. When you take life drawing, you'll study this more in depth, but it's really important to understand this armature and to think of these mass conceptions on the skeleton, because I think it's going to make it a lot easier for you to actually draw the human body later. So then the next thing is, it's sort of like the lima bean and heart syndrome. If you look at the way that the pelvis looks, it actually kind of looks like a heart. And that gives you sort of the rounding of those forms. Okay, and then you have this kind of weird beanie kind of construction, these lobes that it comes down. Okay, now depending on who your teacher is, this is almost like an egg that's incomplete and has a notch taken out of it. Right? It's a good way of thinking about it, because then you'll understand, but it's an egg that's been squashed a little bit. So think of it, I guess, as a flexible egg, like if there was such a thing. So what I do then is I use those ideas to sculpt the rest of the rib cage and to figure out how things work. So if you look here, the rib cage actually flares out here and here. That's the widest part of the egg. So this is an egg standing on its end, right, if you continue the oval. And it flares out a little bit just below your sternum. So this is the solar plexus. If you get hit here, you get out of breath, right? That flaring is just below that. So you can actually sort of trace that on yourself, and then it zooms back in a little bit. I think it's important to know that, because your body actually has a curve as the flesh moves around in this area here. It's almost like it's there to allow your elbows to move in a little bit or something like that. So then the pelvis, you think of it as that heart, and you could square it off a little bit, but a heart shape is the next thing. Now, there's also these, I don't think other people have talked about this, but it seems to me from my studies of the human body, they have these ideas that are called proximal and distal, if you're studying anatomy. You know, if any of you are nursing students. Proximal means it's close in proximity to the body. Distal means it's farther away. What I've noticed is most of the bone heads that come close to the body proximally usually have round socket kinds of joints. And then as they move away distally, they actually all look a little bit like hearts. And that the ball joint will go in, the ball joint of the next joint that's proximal will slide into that sort of heart-shaped joint. And we'll look at that a little bit more closely. So the hip joints, if you look at how the ball of the hip of these upper leg intersects in with the pelvis, you can actually see it's got a sort of circle, and it zooms in a little bit into this joint. Then it zags out again, right? And so we'll see the next thing. So I draw the two balls in there that sort of scoop into this area of the heart, right? And I do the same thing with the upper arms, which are balls. And you can actually kind of see that, right? Looks like two balls up here, okay? And that this looks like an upside down heart again. And then I draw in the upside down heart on the leg. And so this is where you actually need to do some observation of the upper leg or the bones of the upper leg, and kind of understand this, because this is the part that actually is what's called a bony landmark when you're drawing the nude figure. You can actually see that sticking through the skin a little bit, and if you can locate those, so for instance, if you were drawing a person and you blocked in the skeleton and then you knew where those big joints were pushing out, where the bony landmarks were, you're going to have a much easier time, the same way we talked about with the human skull. The kneecap is actually, I think of it as a diamond. And so I'm giving you very simplified forms here. It's just a diamond shape. So again, it's sort of more rounded at the top on the bottom part of the leg, the shin bone, and then it becomes a little bit more of a heart shape on this. The leg bone is a little bit of an exception to that rule that I was telling you about, but I think it still kind of works. It's a little bit more rounded on top. And so I draw in some of the divisions for the feet here. Got the leg bones drawn in, and I'm going to start working on the rest of the body. This is an eraser. You can use this. You know, like I had all these drawing teachers when I was in college that they wanted me to be Matisse, you know, like I couldn't actually erase anything out. And I really encourage the use of erasers and correction on your drawing. It's really okay to do that. But make sure you draw light enough that you can use it. So I erase out some of the forms of the pelvis that I've drawn in so that they're ghost lines. And then I'm going to just do some close observation of some of the planes and some of the turns and movements in and out of the pelvis. Now the reason why I bring this up is the pelvis here actually has a flat part, and this is another bony landmark that sticks out right there. Okay, right there, right there. And so if you were to understand the discs and the movements of the pelvis, and later on if you study how muscles attach, it'll just be easier to draw those things. That's why in the Renaissance Leonardo went and stole bodies and actually dissected them, for exactly that reason. So I'll set up a live skeleton for you guys to draw with later, okay? You can always email me and I'll send you one of these photos to a high resolution photo, and then I will, and you can have it and then you can draw from it. So next couple of things, I'm going to start like indicating in closer the forms. And I've erased out a little bit of the rib cage here. See that? Let's go back for a second. This thing here is this little notch that's hanging off here. The Latin word for it, I think, is manubrium, which is actually means dagger, I think, in Latin. And it's basically like this little weird dagger-like thing that looks almost like a prehistoric arrowhead that comes off of the joint in where your ribs come together. And then the rest of this sort of figure eight that is the center of your sternum, where your ribs come together, I think it's kind of important to observe that, because what you'll see is how the ribs attach to that sternum, to the center. So it's actually another form that I want you to observe a little bit more closely, okay? And then I've erased out some of the outer edges of the rib cage so that I can kind of draw in the ribs a little bit more and where they intersect and where they come together. And through some sort of close observation, what I'm trying to do is observe where it buckles out, where it goes back in. And this form here is actually kind of like a three-form. It sort of waves in and out 2 or 3 times, okay? So you can see it has like 2 bumps out and 2 bumps in. And you can kind of see it here on the skeleton, how it waves in and out 2 times, okay? 2 times in, 2 times out. I think that's kind of useful to do that. So I've zoomed in so you can kind of see it a little bit more. Zoom in, bow out. And then it connects in with the sternum right here. So I suppose what I could do is zoom in a little bit on the sternum here in this reproduction so that you guys can see it. Let me use this magnifying glass thing and zoom in a little bit on it. and then move it down so you guys can see what I'm talking about. Do you see that sort of zig and zag in and out? Okay. And I'll just move this over so you can see the drawing a little bit more. And so the next thing we're going to do is start working a little bit on some of the other divisions that are, oh, that's not going to be very fun. Okay, that's good. This line here that I have, can you kind of see it? It's where it's sort of where the ribs sort of connect up in some ways, but this is actually a ridge. It's a plane, and it flattens across this way, across your body. If you're a guy, it's easier to feel that, but you can actually feel it's a flat plane across from your sternum, and then it drops back on these two sides. This is an actual plane where light breaks. It's a light break. So all of the bony landmarks are actually light breaks where you can find out where the geometric forms come together or where they sort of cross over. That's why I'm pointing them out to you, because you should indicate that in, because if you look at the actual skeleton, can you see how it changes direction a little bit right at that light break? And you can see that when you're looking at the nude form, the nude figure. And animators know this. They know to look for those things when they're building an armature of a skeleton like this. So the next thing is, this is really kind of almost a starburst pattern. And right in the center there, have you noticed that there are, where the manubrium connects up with the sternum here, it's almost like a starburst pattern. And the 5 ribs above it go almost horizontally out from there, but then the bottom 5 ribs, and there are actually, I think, what is it, 11 or 12 ribs? I always forget. But if you notice, it connects up to 2 ribs on the bottom that sort of become rivers that flow into the bottom 3 or 4 ribs. So below that center point of the sternum, you have 2 ribs that come in and then flow out. But above it, they all connect up like railroad tracks, like ties in a railroad track. You know, those are all these things that nobody showed me, and I'm just trying to get you to observe these things a little bit more closely so that you get an idea of it. So once you have that idea of this is the center point, and above this line, there's going to be 5 separate ribs, and below here, the 2 rib connection happens, then you can actually start making your marks to figure out where the rib heads sort of connect in with the sternum. So what I did was I just gave myself a series of hatch marks. And what you can do is you can either draw the spaces in between. Sometimes it's actually easier to figure out the spaces between ribs than it is to actually draw the ribs themselves. Okay? And I did the same thing on the bottom there. See how the 2 ribs kind of come off there like 2 rivers? And so through observation, what you do then is you actually start mapping in what you see in terms of the rib cage, right? So you actually draw those 2 ribs that flow in and how they disconnect and sort of zoom around the back here and here. Is that making some sense? Okay. Just breaking it down into smaller components for you. Erasers, I love them. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of, I use the eraser to get rid of a whole bunch of the distracting lines that were between the ribs that were confusing me. And so now you'll take the time when you're actually doing the drawing. I just didn't want to photograph the whole process of me figuring out where each thing is. And you guys will take the time to actually draw this rib cage in and figure it out. Okay? So, same thing with the spinal column. Spinal column, if you look at it, it's actually sort of each thing bows in the center, and between each little segment of bone, you have these little cushions that are usually there, and you also have a series of almost vestigial ribs coming off of the spinal column on the bottom that are unnecessary in any way, but they do sort of protect some of your internal organs. And I also want you to notice that at the bottom of the spinal column, it widens out when it connects up with the pelvis a little bit. And probably that's just to give it a little bit more stability and a little bit more strength, because the whole weight of your body is resting on that. So you need more surface area of the cushions in between to allow you to support the weight and the turning that happens down at the bottom there on your lower back. So we've got those parts drawn in, and the next part is we're going to draw the upper arms. And like I said before, the upper part is usually a sort of round part it's tucked in. So you see how it tucks in underneath the collarbones there? That's really important, because I think what people think is that they're connected out here, like where I have the cursor. That's not where they are. They're actually tucked in, and so they intersect inside with that sort of rounded shape of your rib cage. And that's why men with broad shoulders, the muscles get built out here. That's why they have that round muscle on the side there. So you draw those two shapes of the bones, and then the bottom bones. So let's go to this thing, move it up a little bit so you can see some of the hands. We can kind of take a look a little bit at the bones of the forearm. You have an ulna, which is this bone here, and a radius. Now, essentially, when I actually teach you how to draw the hands and stuff, this is the anatomical position of the hand, where the thumb is going out, so that the radius radiates out. Do I have that right? Okay, and the ulna is inside. But those bones are actually free jointed, and you can see how they twist over one another. So they're actually kind of a 2x4 that twists and turns. If you turn your hand, you can actually feel it. If you hold your upper arm, you can feel those bones rotating over each other. So it's kind of important in some ways to draw the two bones separately, at least when you're beginning, so that you understand how they rotate and they move. And they actually make your arm change shape as they move. So when you're drawing a person doing different activities, you actually have to know what direction where it meets up with the wrist. Okay? So draw them as two separate bones, and you see one of them widens at the top, this one is wide at the top and the bottom, the radius. Okay? Get it all together. Okay? Next, I think we're going to work on the hands, right? Okay? So I'm going to give you a brief lesson on the hands. We're going to cover the hands in much more depth, I think, next week. But I wanted to go over the skeleton today and then give you a chance to draw figures next class. And I think what we're going to do is we're going to draw figures from casts the first part of class, and then I'm going to give you photos to work from the second part of class so that we can work for that show next time. Okay? So the way that I draw a hand is I actually start with a disc or a sort of paddle, and I divide it in half. So it's like a face, if you think about it. These knuckles here are really that dividing point. That's really the halfway mark. So again, you may have a teacher who gives you a different rule, and they'll give you some wacky sort of other fractions that will make you insane, but since we're all bad math students, the rule of halves again. And then you have this weird little structure at the top right here. I suppose I can zoom in on that a little bit. Let's do that so that you guys can kind of see what I'm talking about. I guess it's easier to see the back, but move this over a little bit. All right. This part here is a series of bones. It's a lot of bones, something like, what is it, 10? 10 bones there. It's called the carpus. I don't even know how do you spell it. C-A-R-P-A-S or P-U-S? And that carpus here is kind of, Raphael wrote about it in one of his texts. It's kind of a quarter of an apple. Okay? And that's why I divide it up, because it connects up with the radius and the ulna here. and it also connects up with the thumb. And notice that the thumb connects all the way back up here. Okay? So I've got the dividing line and I've got the carpus drawn in. It just helps me to understand the fingers a little bit more to do that. And then this one time at band camp, and then what I do is I do another series of halves. So I have the halves, and then I do the next two, 1, 2, 3 on there. 1, 2, 3. And do you see how the joints are actually chevrons or sort of V's or scoops down? So as you move away, that's why your middle finger is so long and why you guys are so good at using it on the highway. It sticks out, right? Because it's the longest finger, right? And it radiates from the center of the carpus, more or less. That's why you wear, they used to think it was the other finger, you know, where your heart connected to. So you draw those in, and then you draw the thumb off of the back. And notice I connected it up with the carpus here, and I gave myself a little ball joint. And it has really 3 joints where these have 1, 2, 3, 4. This really has 3 joints on it, the way that I understand it, okay? And the thumb joint, pretty much the center of this bone is where the center of your hand connects up. So if you look at your hand for a second, you can actually see that this knuckle here is actually about parallel, if you look at your own hand, with that row of knuckles across the center of your hand. You notice that? So it's really bizarre because thumbs come off the back of your hand and they're kind of disconnected. They're different things, okay? They're almost a different entity than the rest of the fingers. Now, the way that I draw these bones of the carpus, I guess these are called metacarpals because they're after the carpus, okay? I start with a ball on each end, and then I just sort of do a scoop, almost like the spinal column. But they are flat, too. So they're not cylinders. They're almost like balls with a sort of flat surface that runs towards the knuckles. Then I just do the same thing with the second set. And they get narrower as they move away from the center line. See how the bones are becoming more narrow? So I start with 2 circles, and then I just sort of scoop them out on either side. Okay? Then I just do the next with the next set. It's the same thing. And the tips of your fingers, they kind of look like Hershey Kisses. Do you see how they're kind of like Hershey Kisses upside down? You know, those little foil-wrapped candies? Let's look at the other hand. You can really see it there. I'm very scientific about it, right? So let's zoom this back out. Oh, there he is. And then you guys can do that when you're drawing the skeleton. I just wanted to go into a little bit more depth on the hands for you when you're drawing these things. If you really want to get anal about it, there's actually even 2 smaller balls within the big disc, right? So you start with those, and then you even give yourself smaller junctures. But don't get carried away. It'll make you insane. All right. The big toe is like your thumb. It has 3. The rest of the toes have 4. So I just do the same thing I do with the hands. I give myself a center line where the row of knuckles, if you were, are. What are the bones of the foot called again? Tarsus and the metatarsals. Thank you. So this is the tarsus, which is like the carpus, and these are the metatarsals that come after. And just do the same division where you do a half, and then you keep doing smaller halves as you move away. But luckily, most people wear shoes, and it makes it easier. All right, so the head. How to get a head. We've done the head before, so I sort of just erase out some of the disc a little bit, and this is just a quick review for some of you guys. Get the oval drawn in a little bit better. The nose is a Lexus symbol that's upside down, or the Star Trek symbol, or a heart that's upside down that rests on the half line. So halfway is the eyes, halfway of the bottom half is where the nose rests on, halfway between the bottom of the nose and the chin is the mouth line. And you guys are experts at this now. And the eye socket is kind of like aviator glasses. Remember I showed you to draw it a little bit more like a rectangle in some ways. So there's a plane that goes this way, a plane that goes this way, and then a plane that goes this way and this way. Okay? And these are the main things that I tried to show you before, that there are these breaks, 1, 2, and then a flat part for the bottom. Get the zygomatic arch, and then of the upper mandible, and you've got the face really constructed. And then we need to complete the shape of the skull, especially if he's a bald guy like me, right? And so, these are the teeth. All right, let's go through the teeth really fast. 1 line down the center, and then you just echo it on either side. 2 lines on either side. Then the next. Then the next. Okay, this is not his head exploding. This is actually meant to make you kind of look at the skull a little bit. Now, I got to point out that the skeleton that I'm using here really was not very anatomically correct in the skull, so I made up stuff that would make it more sense. So remember I said there's a plane that runs up the side that's usually kind of flat, but sometimes it can move out this way. Sometimes it can move in this way, depending on how pinheaded the person is. Then you have another plane that runs this way and this way. And then I just sort of round it off on the top. So 1, 2 planes, and then a rounded top. Okay? And there you have it, the completed skeleton. Yeah, that's the hand for another time. Okay. All right, so let's take a break. I guess I can turn off the